afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of JMC Live Interviews. Today in studio we have Professor Dennis Ray. I've actually had math class with this amazing man. He's a 30-year veteran and classroom teacher of mathematics and native Ohioan. He earned his bachelor's degree in mathematics from the College of Worcester and went on to earn his master's at Ohio University down in Athens. He has several honors, including the certification in adolescent young adult mathematics and the prestigious National Board of Professional Teaching Standards in '97. He's worked with the Department of Education here in Ohio. He's currently a professor at OUC, that's the Ohio University Chillicothe branch, and also the Ohio Christian University. He teaches math at both campuses. He's also a tutor. He's the coordinator for the tutoring program at OUC. And he's written 2 books, which we've had enough time to go through these books. And one of them is called The Stakes Are High, God's Wisdom for Our Public Schools, and A.W.O.L Christians. You need to stay tuned in to this amazing interview with a veteran who has been in the education system long enough to show you what life is really about. Stay tuned. Well, welcome, Professor Ray. I know this is a wonderful, almost 90 degrees outside today. This is the 3rd day I'm looking at my friends in, Washington. They got snow. This is a quite interesting end of March, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today.
Oh man, this has been an amazing time. Last week was finals. I don't know how it is at the Christian University for finals, but I know this has been quite busy time for you for grading, and I'd like to thank you for just stopping by and getting right into this. And for those who aren't aware of Dennis's background in math, normally people, at least that I'm aware of, that go and get degrees in mathematics, they're not that very English writing savvy. Doesn't mean they can't communicate anything. So I'm going to get into figuring out, where did you find Jesus along the way in this amazing journey from a professor to an author of 2 books, A.W.O.L Christians and The Stakes Are High. So can you explain to us real quick a little bit about your testimony along the way life's journey's brought you?
Well, I have great parents. In fact, they're still living and close by now, and raised me in the Methodist Church, and they provided that seed, that strong background for me. And even though as I got older and I got out of the house and on to college and out on my own, I kind of strayed a little bit and wasn't ever, in a lot of trouble or anything like that, but I just kind of ignored my biblical upraising and kind of ignored the idea that even God was in control of my life for quite a few years there. Got kind of on the wrong path and got farther and farther away from God, and he finally decided to get my attention, I think, and got me back on track. And just really within the last 15, 18 years or so, I've really kind of rededicated myself to the Lord and got into a lot of the teachings and of a lot of good biblical teachers, both in the internet and on TV and in my local churches and so on. So really have made a big move within that time frame to get back on track, and I think I've heard from the Lord the direction he wants me to go, and partially that's extending my teaching from the mathematics classroom into some of the areas that we see in God's Word and some of the issues that I brought up in these books.
Now, speaking of the books, your background as a public school teacher, that goes right in hand with The Stakes Are High, God's Wisdom for Our Public Schools. I've taken extensive time reading both books, and you being a veteran of, I'm going to use the word veteran because 30 years of math teaching, it goes way beyond just opening a book about 2 + 2 = 4. You really build relationships with these students throughout the multiple amounts of years, and in some cases seeing the same students year in, year out, because you teach multiple classes. One of the things that I've looked and wanted to quote out of this book is teaching students that their attitude is a choice can go a long way toward building character traits of a godly, successful adult. And just looking at that sentence alone out of The Stakes Are High, you realize that as a teacher, you're really raising a new generation to become the next adults and the next leaders in our society. So do you want to talk a little bit about The Stakes Are High and how this book came about and the purpose of it?
Sure, absolutely. I think just in the 30 years, obviously, that I taught in the public schools, I saw vast changes in the young people that were coming into my classes, and kind of, I grew up respecting my education. I really wanted to get a good education. I had this thirst for knowledge that a lot of us have growing up, and I think we all have this, as a beginning teachers, we have this idealistic view that we're going to change the world and we're going to prepare these young people to be leaders and so on. And it really doesn't take more than a couple years in the classroom to have that little idealistic bubble start to burst a little bit, because you realize that not only all these young people have that thirst for knowledge, they don't have respect for education, and a lot of that comes from their home and their upbringing. A lot of them don't have the loving parents that I had growing up to support them and point out to them how important this education is. And I think this whole idea of character development is something that we're lacking in our education. We get so focused on certain test scores or what the legislature wants us to do with our students and so on, and we're losing touch of a lot of these character issues that sentence talks about, that these students need to know that everything they do is a choice, and there's going to be consequences, good or bad, depending on what their choices are.
I look in your book too, you say, in our society today, where so many young people are growing up without one or both parents, there is a tremendous need for role models. We've become those role models. And to pause for a second and to let our listeners know, I'm one of those students that needed a role model. And it was one of my math professors, it was one of my English professors and band teachers. There are a lot of children who place on a high throne pedestal their teachers, because some of them spend more time with their teachers than their own parents, family, or friends. So the responsibility of a teacher in today's society is one of the highest priority, especially if you are a Christian and a teacher. The role that God has placed upon your shoulders today is not one of just bringing the message of the gospel, but also on how to educate and protect and guide and direct students. We live in a day where there's bullying, there's sex trafficking, there's assaults, and all sorts of different things that are coming against a student that 30, 40 years ago was not here anymore. I mean, right now, the school back in Texas where I'm from, and even certain places here in Ohio, you have to go through a metal detector. There's police. I realized that for a teacher to fully integrate all of their abilities, it requires an extra amount of time. Do you want to just talk a little bit about your teaching experience and how you saw things change and where you see it's heading next?
Oh, absolutely. If you look back in the nation's history, our national education developed through these one-room classrooms and these settlers moving west and teaching their children, and mostly they taught out of the Bible. They taught their children to read the Bible. They taught biblical values and morals and so on. And by us removing the Bible and really God and all references to even our Christian heritage from the public schools, we've really set ourselves up for disaster. And it falls on the teacher to be the role model that some of these children don't have outside of rock stars or rappers or pro athletes, things like that, that they feel that they need to connect to because they don't have an adult role model close to them. So a lot of people or a lot of students are like you, they'll attach themselves to teachers and figure out their need for respect and so on from them because they're not getting it anywhere else. And to me, it all boils down to this fact that we have separated our education system from biblical values, and it really has turned out to be a recipe for disaster in a lot of cases. I just think, one of the quotes that I found along the way was from Franklin Graham, who said that for the sake of our commission to go and make disciples, I hope that Christians won't abandon the public schools. I hope they'll treat them as a mission field and work toward improving the situation in there. So I think it really falls upon us as Christian leaders, Christian teachers, administrators, wherever they may be placed, to do what we can to provide for these kids.
Now, I'm one of the few students, and I've seen that there's been some laws and regulations allowing it. Franklin Graham and others have been involved in it, and I don't know if Professor Ray knows about this. We were able to bring the Bible back into the education system through a Bible literature course. I'm one of the students who actually went through a Bible literature course. So for those of you out there that are administrators, superintendents, or teachers, there is a medium that you can try and bring Jesus back into the school, and it's through programs like See You at the Pole. It's through Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and there are several other groups involved. One of the things we did back in Texas is we got permission from one of the teachers to use their classroom in the morning for just prayer before class started, so there was no interruption, and we did it at lunch. There was nothing affecting a classroom setting, so there was no way that anyone could tell us not to do it, and it was voluntary. And then back again to the biblical literary faction. I mean, there's options today for teachers and students to work hand in hand. I know a lot of youth groups bring their youth pastor to campus, either for breakfast or for lunch, and they're allowed to go. I remember at one point our football team had a chaplain. So there's still ways we can bring Jesus Christ still into the school and still try and respect those through love without offending those that don't want to be involved. So that's the key phrase here, is not everyone wants to be involved in Christianity anymore. It's not a popular thing. I realize the biggest issue coming up in today's society is about graduation and prayer and where Christians can fit in that role and how things, should you have a moment of silence or not. Professor, do you want to try and talk a little bit about the where you see Christians can actually activate their faith from a teacher perspective at a campus?
Yeah, I think one big thing is, as Christian teachers, we need to be aware of what we're allowed to do and what we're not, because there's a lot of misunderstanding and there's a lot of fear. The first reaction that an administrator or a school board will have is a fear of litigation if they allow something to happen, when they really may not know whether it's acceptable or not. And there's several good legal organizations out there fighting in the courts for issues. Just for instance, just in the past 6 months, I read a story that a school principal had come up to a girl in the cafeteria and told her she couldn't read her Bible at lunchtime. And there's no basis for that. It's a perfectly legal thing for her to do during her spare time, to pull out her Bible and read. But it was just this ignorance of what the laws really say, what we can do, that I think we as Christians need to be at the forefront for combating those things and stepping up and say, hey, this isn't right. They do have the right to do this. We can do this. So it's an education for us. We need to be educated in those areas so that we know what we're allowed to do, and when something is denied that should be allowable, we need to stand up for that as well.
Now I want to transition over to A.W.O.L Christians. This is Acting Without Love Christians, and it goes hand in hand with his first book about the teaching realm, because we've both said key phrases is acting through love. I'm going to read a sentence to you from A.W.O.L Christians, and then I'm going to just ask Professor a couple more questions. It says, when we act in love, our actions are not hasty, not varying depending on a particular mood we are in at the time. Now I realize, especially in today's society, where there are atheist groups who are wanting to remove all forms of religion. There are other religions who are offended when Christians pray at any event, whether it's graduation or something in court. We're always seeing everything ending up in court and somehow, faction. Someone's been offended, someone who's been hurt, and I realize today Christians have forgotten what love really means. Do you want to explain a little bit about A.W.O.L Christians to everyone today?
Sure. The way the title came about is usually think of the term A.W.O.L in terms of the military. When a soldier or member of the military is not at their post, they're not performing their duties, they're said to be A.W.O.L. And when that happens, they're not going to be able to have the benefits of their rank and their all the things that go with their position in that armed forces area. And I kind of compare that to A.W.O.L in the Christian sense, that if we're acting without love, we're A.W.O.L from really the greatest commandment that Jesus gave us, the two greatest commandments, which were to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so we, by not following that commandment, are kind of limiting ourselves from the covenant we have with God and our place as children of God there, and some of the benefits that covenant promises us. So that's where it all kind of came together with the title and everything. The quote that you have there, I think, is from a chapter where I tried to dissect the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, which a lot of people refer to as the love chapter. Love is patient, kind, all that. And to me, that's a big fault of we as a church, that we say all the right things, we go to Sunday service, we do all the right things, but then we don't treat others, even other Christians or others that are non-believers, with that love and demonstrate Jesus' love to them, so that they can see the actual benefits of being a Christian.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest things that I've noticed in the Bible is it says it's a two-edged sword, and this is probably something new for many listeners. I've had a little training in fencing and swordsmanship before, and one of the biggest things that I was taught about a double blade is it's for offense and defense. And many times we can speak tough love, where we want to go and cross out the enemy and defeat the enemy, but then we don't want to put our weapon up in defense by showing love. See, that's one of the issues today Christians have. It's easy to say, well, this is a sin and you shouldn't do it, and then the person walks away. What happened to saying, I don't agree with what you're doing, but you're not doing it right now, and even if you were, I still love you, and continually find ways to reach that person beyond this thing that they're doing. Because what we've done as humans, and this is the most basic need of many humans, or especially those that are in the math field or computer science field, we love to make lists and categories and databases, and the list goes on and on and on. I just used the word list again. You getting my point here, listeners? We love to put people in a box based on, well, they don't fit my list of commandments, because that's what we've done. We don't have the 10 commandments. We have my commandments and their commandments. We all have these different rules and regulations, and that goes hand in hand with the title A.W.O.L Christians. Well, if you are a Christian, your goal is to go out and spread the gospel, show them what the truth is, and still reach them regardless if they're not wanting to serve you. Then I've heard the argument, and people will bring up the Bible verse, and I'm going to ask Professor Ray this. What is his thoughts about the verse about how do you deal with the unequally yoked people? Don't hang out with them too much. How do you love someone who is not lining up with the Word of God? How do you explain that to a listener today who will come to you and say, well, I can't go and talk to that person because they're not saved, or they're not going to my church, they're not doing that? How do you communicate with that, expressing what love means to that person?
That's a very difficult area, I think, for a lot of people, and I'm probably as guilty as anybody in that area, is shying away from a certain area, or not dealing with a situation in love as I should, simply because of that kind of unequal yoke there. I think the key thing there is the yoke. I think the yoke ties you together if you're doing the same things, performing the same activities, I think that's the yoke that you want to avoid. You don't want to be caught up in their kind of carnality or whatever it is, but you still want to be available to show them what God's love really is, and make them want that by your demonstrations and by your actions and by your interactions with them. It doesn't mean you have to spend 24 hours with them a day, and go everywhere with them, but when you do have that contact, that it should be a loving contact, a demonstration of Jesus' love.
Here's another quote from the book. It says, "If that person is able to communicate and present all wisdom and knowledge regarding their topic with great eloquence, but cannot treat their pupil or audience in a loving, caring manner, they may be filling the listener's ears with facts they won't see the importance of." And I like to get into a little more when it comes to love. One of the things that I've been taught, and probably Professor Ray too, is we as Christians, when it comes to the innermost being of our relationship with Jesus Christ, that's not something like when you're trying to get help and get advice from an elder, or you're wanting to do other ministry work with somebody. You may not want to go and express those opinions with someone who's an unbeliever, but at the same point, you do need to take time to meet with an unbeliever, or better yet, another phrase, someone who doesn't line up with everything you think about. Because how is that person going to learn about Christ's love? How is this person going to get saved if everyone's too busy worrying about what they're not doing? Christ specifically made us humans, that we're not robots. We have this free will. And back to that compartmentalized statement about lists and everything, and for listeners that are not aware, Christ doesn't compartmentalize sins outside of this blaspheme of the Holy Spirit, but I'm not going to get into that stuff. But sins are just sin. It's just one word. We as humans write sin at the top of a page, and then we put a bracket of trees, and we go down the list and break it down. Christ says we're all guilty of sin today. Every single human being ever in existence on planet Earth is guilty of sin. And the penalty is death. So Jesus had to come to set us free. And I think that's one of the biggest missing pieces. If people can see the puzzle of what can love do. So Professor, can you explain what love could do for people? Because I know you've talked about that in the book a little bit.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest problem that even we as Christians have is this idea of what we mean by love. Because if you watch TV and all these worldly views of different emotional type connections of love, and that's not what we're talking about. I mean, yeah, if you really sincerely love God with all your heart, there's some emotion there, of course. But the foundation of this is, the love that the Bible teaches, that God's agape love, is not an emotional thing. It's a choice that you make, that you're going to treat this person as yourself. I mean, you're going to pull out any stops in terms of, if you see an opportunity, if God presents you with an opportunity, that's when you have to act. And it's not, that quote there kind of ties into the education thing again too, how we've all had good and bad teachers. We've all had the teachers that just throw out the data there, and we can tell they don't really care about us, they just want to get the job done. And then we have these other teachers, like we talked about earlier, how they're really, you can attach yourself to them because they care. That love is there. And without that kind of person in the classroom, you're not going to be as successful in education as without. I don't know that I'm dancing around your question a little bit there. I don't think I've attacked it completely, maybe.
You're doing a great job today, Professor. One of the other stories in here is about Ashley, who wins a car, and she has a friend who desperately needs a car. You want to tell the listeners a little bit about Ashley's story about this car?
That was an amazing story. I don't remember how many years ago this was, but we had a program in our high school where students could kind of gain points. It was a performance plus, I think is what we call the program. And it wasn't based just on grades or anything like that. It wasn't for the quote better student. It was for anybody. If you showed improvement in your attendance or improvement in your grades or different areas like that, you could qualify for these points. And every quarter they had a special meal for them, pizza or whatever. And the culmination was in the spring when they had businesses throughout the community donate prizes, and they'd have drawings. And one of them was always a used car from a local car dealer. And this young lady had been wanting this car. She just got her license, and she was just so excited. She really was hoping for this car. And they actually pulled her name. And then when she got up to the microphone to accept it, she said, this kind of stunned everybody, but she said, I really want my friend to have this car instead of me. She really needs it. And this was another young lady whose family was not very well off, and she had to transport siblings and so on, and she really needed this car. And it was just that's the kind of love we're talking about here. Just so happened that one of them, the girl that won the car was African American, and her friend was Caucasian. That wasn't an issue, right? That had nothing to do with the situation. That kind of love transcends all this racial problems that we see in a lot of day-to-day activities. But it was just so heartwarming. You get emotional about it now, just thinking about it. It's been all those years ago. But to have a 16-year-old demonstrate God's love like that is just, it's humbling to me at my age, saying, man, if she can do that, what more could the rest of us do that are in even better positions to do something like that? So.
The biggest phrase that I heard growing up in the 90s was getting out of your comfort zone. That's something I don't hear a lot anymore. And to explain what I mean is, it goes right back to this list. Now imagine you're in a bubble or a box, and this is your own personal world that you live in. This is how you love. This is how you eat, breathe, sleep, study, work, play. That's your life. Well, Jesus Christ, when you get saved, He pops this bubble. There's no more bubble. But the problem is we live in this body, and there's a spirit which wants to serve Christ, and then there's this flesh that wants to serve your old life, wants to serve in sin. And what happens is we start to try and recreate our bubble. So stories like Ashley can't happen unless you don't have a bubble anymore. Because this whole thing about loving one another is not going to be a fun experience in the beginning. It's not going to be something instantaneously easy for every human being. Now, yes, there are many people who get saved, and in 3 days after getting saved, can preach an hour-and-a-half sermon. Others, it can take 20 to 30 some odd years before they can get to that point. We're all at different levels, but the matter is, what are we willing to do? Because Christ talks about us having a living sacrifice, meaning everything we do is supposed to be a form of worship. And worship is found through love, because that's what Jesus said. It's this great commandment. This is what we're supposed to do day in and day out. Yes, we're supposed to sit here and say, God's Word says don't do this, but that's what the world is busy focusing, looking at, is the list of what you can't do. So this is why Christians are failing, and while the world continues to point fingers at Christians, because no one is lining up to do the other side of the sword. We are A.W.O.L. We need to report to duty. We need to stand up today and do what we're called to do, which is to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's the other issue. I think people have stopped loving themselves. Reading both of these books, you can see it. You can see it in the eyes of the kids. If you're a parent today, I challenge you to get these books. And I'm quite curious, Professor, what advice do you have for the teachers and parents and students that may have not acted in love, or they are on campus either as a student or as a teacher, or they're kind of interested from a parent's point of view? What advice do you have as the final word to our listeners today on what Christians should be doing in the world?
Well, I think the number one step is you need to develop just intimate relationship with Jesus. I mean, it just can't be, yeah, I'm a Christian, yeah, I go to church. I mean, you've got to get in His Word. You mentioned that the Word is sharper than any two-edged sword. It's also living and powerful, and it'll meet you wherever you're at in your spiritual growth. It'll speak to you. You know, it's amazing how you can read a scripture that you learned as a child, and you read it now, and it means something totally new to you. And it's because it's alive. It's just like a person. You know, you react to a person differently than you did that same person 15 years ago. So I think that's the starting point. We've all got to get a better foundation of what the Word's telling us, what God's love really means, what the covenant promises us, and then be able to explain that, you know, better to others. It's like if I were teaching math without having studied any math. It's crazy. I wouldn't even attempt that. So we can't teach God's love without a study of it ourselves. But then just be active. Just follow the leading. I mean, if you're intensely close with Jesus, he'll guide you. He'll open doors. He'll show you what to do. Just be bold with it. Don't back down no matter what you're seeing and hearing from the outside world. That's not who should be guiding us.
Well, Professor Ray, I'd like to thank you for coming today. For those of you that are interested, A.W.O.L Christians and The Stakes Are High are his books that are out. We will be having the links where you can order these books. And we have a few that will be given away on upcoming shows as well. So thank you for coming, Professor, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.